Hey, I'm Matt Porwoll, the documentary cinematographer, and today I'm at Technicolor Postworks with Ben and Jack. And we're here to have a conversation about post-production considerations and working with the C300 Mark II. So if you guys wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves.
Hi, I'm Ben Murray. I'm Vice President of Creative Services here at Technicolor Postworks. My job is really to take the projects as they come in and make sure that we pair up the right talent, the right gear, and the right environment to have the best quality project as far as what we leave the building with. So we're always considering, is it for theatrical, is it for broadcast, is it for the internet, and how do we set it up so that we can have just the best experience for everybody involved and the best quality project at the end product at the end of that experience.
Hi, I'm Jack LEWARS. I'm a digital intermediate colorist here at Technicolor Postworks. I'm a colorist. My job is to enhance the cinematographer's vision.
Great. So this is one of those conversations that I'm excited to have because I don't think we get to have it as often as we should. So when we were starting this project, we came in and spoke with you before production even began, just to get a sense of how we should set up our workflow, considerations that we should have when bringing our footage to you for color. Just give me an idea, kind of walk me through how that conversation went and the considerations that you did have for us with our footage.
That first step was a huge deal for us, and it's a big deal, I think, with any production. Is from our point of view, the fact that you're asking questions about post is ideal. We hate to have projects come where they've locked themselves in based on not knowing or making an assumption. Like, we're really here to try to keep the process as flexible as possible, to keep your options open, and to really let the decisions that you're making about the visuals and where you're taking your film or short form project, not to be constraining yourself in production. So what we're here to do is really to test beforehand, to look at what is it you're trying to accomplish, and based on what you're trying to accomplish, what can you do or what can't you do to make your life once you get into post as painless as possible. I think what was great when we started talking about it, really with all of the new color spaces that are out there, all of the different formats that are available, to really think about how do we make this look as good as possible? And also, how can you see it in production so that it matches what it's going to look like in post? And I think we're all visual people, and the situation I hate hearing about is that somebody's on set saying, oh, trust me, this will look good later. Like, I think it's a huge deal that you can set up your monitoring environment in production to match what we have in post.
Right.
And how can we do that in a way that's not destructive to the image? How can we do it so you can see, oh, here's pretty much an approximation of what we have. We can take that approximation and run it through the editorial process. So when the director's working, again, it's never, trust me, this will look better later. Like, let's have something that looks pretty darn good from the beginning. And let's make sure that, as long as we're all talking to each other, we can make that happen. And when you come with a project into a post facility, we're ready for you. We know what you're coming with, and the next step, instead of trying to recreate something, can be all about enhancing that experience.
Well, and one thing that I loved is, when we first sat down and had our conversation, I think, there's no one way to do any project, right? And so it depends, for us, we're fortunate to be able to bring our footage here to you to be graded. And so, if we didn't have that luxury, then we might take a completely different workflow approach. And so, for instance, you gave us the idea that we should really be shooting in the widest color space possible, right? Bring you the most information you can and let you scale it back.
Exactly. Then that way, we have the most information to give you whatever deliverables you may want, especially if you're in a case where you're shooting a movie, it's going to a festival, and you don't know in the end what your deliverable requirements are going to be. For this festival, I need a DCP screener. But once it's acquired at that point, you're going to have a whole other list of deliverables. So it's best to have that highest quality image capture. So at that point, we can manipulate it anyway to make sure all your deliverables look excellent as you intended.
Right. So Ben, we have a lot of different options within the camera of how we can shoot. We can shoot in 709, we can shoot 2020, we can shoot cinema gamut, we can shoot, so can you give us just a little idea of where a lot of those options should come into play, considerations that you should think about in terms of distribution that would impact what choices you're choosing with the camera settings.
Currently, Rec. 709 is really the target that people are shooting to. It's great because it's a good interchange language. You can see it on a computer monitor. You can see it on a broadcast monitor. You can project it, and it's going to look pretty much the same. People working in post, the offline editorial guys, they're going to be working in Rec. 709. So it's just a way that everybody can really be seeing the same footage. When we get into post and finishing, that's where we can change the color space that we're going to finish in. But it's really about, in a way, you're collecting all this information. You want to collect as much as possible at the greatest range so you have the greatest amount of flexibility later. But then you're fitting it into whatever color space you're choosing to work in. So to me, Rec. 709 is a great place where we have a standard that across the industry, across the different, pretty much across any platform, we can shoot to that, and everybody has the same language. Everybody knows what they're doing. So that's our real mastering format. That would be for dailies, for instance.
But if we were going theatrical, then you would make adjustments based on that.
Right.
If we were going somewhere else, we would make those adjustments.
Exactly, because you get the files back, so we'd essentially start after your dailies process with the raw image again, and then do a P3 color space for theatrical, and then from there trim back to the Rec. 709, and then from there to your HDR or whatever.
The big thing to me is that no matter what you're working in, you still have a reference to what was done on set. And that's a huge deal for us, is to maintain what you looked at, the decisions you made on set. You should be able to see those same decisions in post. And so there's a lot of ways we do that, and it really involves, on a basic level, no matter what, you can use lookup tables. Mm-hmm. And from the beginning, one of our first questions was, hey, what lookup tables are you shooting with? And depending on your level of resources, sometimes we'll create custom lookup tables for you to work with. So you can have 3 or 4 different looks that you can choose to use on set. And as long as you use those as your starting point, you have those when you come to grade.
Because it doesn't have to be complicated. We're not, we're not using these lookup tables to determine what the look will ultimately be. It's just to know that that we're matching based on what I'm seeing in the viewfinder when I'm shooting to when you guys load the footage in and start grading from there.
I think that's actually a great point, because you guys have the offline reference essentially, then we go back in for a theatrical grade in the DI process. So the projector might be set up to a P3 space, but I know that the director, cinematographer, editor has been watching that Rec. 709 offline cut, and no matter how bad the color is or how good the color is, that is burned into your brain essentially for that many months that it took you to make the movie. So when I initially start doing a trim pass, even though I feel like the color might not be accurate or where we want to go, I oftentimes will do a pass first that just matches to that offline, so people aren't coming in shocked, and then I slowly back them away from the color, just so it's like a slow and steady process, as opposed to like, what did you do? This looks nothing like what we're used to watching. It becomes kind of a shocking element, so you have to kind of ease everybody and your eye and my eye back off of it.
And the other thing, what has really become an industry standard with these LUTs is when you step into the DI, you can already have the same look applied. It's automatic. So at any point, and what I love about this, anytime it's like, hey, what did it look like on set? In the past, it was like, oh, let's pull up some reference stills. Here's how it looks on a monitor. But now we can have that setting. It's automatic, and you can say, here's what it looked like. And it doesn't matter what color space you're in, because we can convert. All of that can be done.
Right.
It's just, hey, what did it look like on set? Bang, here's what it looked like on set. So it's just a great reference point. So you don't go too far into the weeds, or maybe you really want to have a totally different look, but at any point you can have that as part of the conversation. Hey, what did it look like when we were making these decisions a couple months ago?
So with our project, we didn't have on set any crazy looks that we had developed beforehand. We wanted a baseline of Rec. 709. So what we ended up doing is we used just the internal camera LUT. But one thing that's nice to get that information to you is we recorded proxy files in HD as opposed to 4K. And we were able to apply that 709 lookup table directly to those proxies. So at least here you're getting one version that has the 709 that I was viewing in already baked into the footage. So you have something to match back to. And then you've got the untouched log 2 footage in UHD that you're correcting off of. And so Does, from your perspective, would you like having a lookup table file that you're working from, or does having as simple as a reference image from set work as well?
For us, we love getting that lookup table file because we can convert it. It's not extra media. It's literally just metadata. So a teeny little computer file that goes on a thumb drive can translate on these huge raw files exactly what those proxies look like. The proxies are great because offline editorial, they're in when you're working. It's like, hey, this looks good. This is what we were making it look like. It's not a washed out flat image. So that's a huge deal when starting the post process for your editor, for the assistant editors, for the creative side of editing. It's great that they're not looking at a flat image. And the reference for us, it's another safety net so that we can see, hey, this LUT and anything else that we're translating, does it match what the reference looks like? But really the LUT on its own is enough for us. And it makes it just a very fast process to get our uncompressed raw footage in 4K, needing huge heavy iron equipment to do a need to bearing. We can still see exactly what the proxies look like with a teeny file.
We can use that LUT as like a reference back. So it's not like, oh, I'm matching back to what you have. Like now we know that what you saw on that Rec 709 on that monitor is exactly what now you're seeing here at the facility. But then to further go to the DI process, sometimes we'll take that LUT off and then just grade from scratch knowing. But that way you can say, hey, this is where you were 100% on set. Now where would you like to be?
Right.
And with those LUTs, this is where it gets really cool because it's like, oh, we're going to projection. It needs to be in P3 or XYZ for the DCP color space, or for a computer, it's sRGB. All of these different spaces are out there. You're going to have all these options. There's a version of the LUT that went from this raw file to Rec 709. Well, guess what? To get to that other format, you just choose the LUT that goes from the raw to that other format. And so you don't have to really grade into these places to have a good starting point. It's really choose your destination, and the LUT, there will be one to get you there.
To get you there.
Yeah, gets you very close.
So we were just talking about Rec 709 as kind of a baseline color space we've been working with for quite some time. Now we're starting to see some other color spaces open up, and in the C300 Mark II, we're seeing BT 2020. Can you tell me a little bit about that color space and what that means for us as shooters?
So the color spaces that are coming out now, it's really, you have a wider gamut, in a way, if you have a cup and you're filling it with water, you now have a bigger cup. So there's more information, more color data that you can have in your display that you're showing at the end of the day. So Rec 709, the reason that's a standard is it's been through a million iterations. Everybody's agreed upon what it should look like. For these new higher range color formats, we're still, it's not the Wild West, but there's still no true standard. So it's great to be thinking about it, but if you, as a shooter, you should really be shooting for as wide range as possible, and then you take all of that data and fit it into whatever cup your final format is. And that can change, and it shouldn't be frustrating because even a small cup, like for instance a white point, you can constrain that to whatever you need. So Rec 709 is one place you can go larger. DCPs are a much wider gamut. And so BT 2020 is a wider color space. It just means that when you're looking on monitors, if you have a monitor that's capable of going beyond Rec 709, you'll see those values.
Great. So now we're talking about expanding out our color space. There's now been some research, and it sounds like you guys are starting to implement this in projects as well with HDR. So can you give me a little ideas how HDR fits into this whole conversation?
Yeah, HDR is a high dynamic range. So it's exactly what Ben was saying, a way to display these extra colors and bit depths. And so now a lot of times you do have deliverables and requirements. You're seeing it more from places like Amazon, where they're kind of future-proofing in a way that they're requiring deliverables in this HDR format. So when it does happen, they have a catalog of films ready to go that are able to play on these sets. So you're seeing that more and more just recently, I think in the past 6 months to the last year, where it's becoming a bigger thing. And it also requires a lot more time in the color process because you do grade to Rec 709 or grade to DCI P3, and then you do a trim pass, which is essentially a LUT that will take you 90% from a P3 color space to an HDR color space, and you have to essentially go back and trim. However, some of the jumps are greater from color spaces, and to HDR, it's almost a regrade in certain instances.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is, depending on what format you're going to, it has different constraints. So when we say trim pass, it's because, yeah, you can have that LUT on production that goes to Rec 709, and then you switch it out, and you have another one that takes you to P3. And it will take you there, but all of a sudden, you have a wider range to play with. So the trim pass is that part where let's creatively get into it. What can I now do that I couldn't do before? Or if you're going smaller, let's say you're going to the web, it's like, oh, wow, like this translated, but my highlights that used to have a nice roll off are now just clipped. So creatively, how can we dial that back and make it look great for that format? I've seen it where a director can be in the room, they'll be trim passing to an HD monitor, but then they'll say, let's load it on my phone. How does it look? And they'll literally put the iPhone next to the monitor and then say, okay, we need to go somewhere in between. That's what the trim pass is. It's that creative part of how do we get it to look great for the format. I think what's crazy with HDR is that's such a different format as far as how much new space you get in the highlights and the darks, that in some ways it's a new language in the same way that 3D is a new language. And what I mean from that is I had the experience of watching an HDR pass happen where lights in the background, string of lights, used to be just a nice defocused background element, nice ambiance. But in HDR, they were so bright, they popped up. It's like I couldn't pay attention to the actors because I had these super bright lights. That should have been a subtle thing. So with HDR, the trim pass it's turning out that the trim pass isn't just to translate it into that space, but hey, some of the elements are now distracting.
So it's almost becoming a reworking of the entire look of the film.
Yeah.
So as the future progresses and we get more into HDR and more people want it, want to see it, and it's becoming more wide in homes and things like that. As you start shooting HDR, as Ben was saying, a small little twinkle light behind somebody's head is now extremely distracting. So, suddenly you have to start taking that into consideration when you shoot, and that comes back to circling back to testing. To testing, let's do it. And it's okay if you have, for instance, a bright image on HDR on one side, but then you don't want to be cutting to an image on the other side, your B shot, where there's no bright lights behind it, because otherwise you're getting kind of this seizure effect where you have a bright, super shiny object in one side, and then you're cutting back to the other side and your eye is quickly readjusting in this kind of back and forth conversation. So I think as the future progresses, that the testing phase is going to be very important to the HDR process and pipeline.
So it's essentially trying to take further understanding of how dynamic range influences how we expose a shot. Now, not only are we looking at dynamic range, but we're also looking at color information as well in how that can be played, either dialed up while we're shooting or what its advantages are of being able to tone it back in post.
That's correct. I think it's going to be definitely a rethinking on the shooting process as it becomes more popular.
And that, to me, that's the thing to just keep hammering it back. And I think one of the big values of having Canon do this type of series is to learn that anybody can shoot as wide range as possible when they acquire the footage. When they're shooting, they shouldn't be thinking about restricting. The LUTs that these series are about teaching about, that are on the websites that you can download, that lets you see what it can look like. But you're not restricting yourself to that. When you're shooting, you can still, even if you're going for a computer monitor that's really restrictive, that original footage can be ready to go to HDR someday.
Exactly.
Like there's no reason to limit yourself when you're shooting.
So we've been talking a lot about the color space choices that we have with the camera. And obviously for this project, we've decided to shoot everything in cinema gamut as wide as we possibly can so that you can bring us back down for whatever distribution needs we have. But we, of course, have a variety of other color spaces that we can shoot with the camera. So what are some reasons that we might want to limit ourselves out of the gate with our color space and make it a little simpler for certain workflows?
I think, to me, when I think about a production that's deliberate, that has the time for these other steps, for processing, shooting wide is default the way to go because it gives you the flexibility to change things later. I think, especially in docs, you don't have that luxury of being able to stop. Let's reset, let's protect for a highlight. shooting wide gives you the opportunity to really capture as much as possible and then afterwards process it. I think it's a really big deal. You don't have to go to a facility for this. At home, you can shoot tests with your camera, doing different exposure levels and seeing what can I really get out of this wide range. And that's something we're here to help. We're here to really set more hardcore looks with people, but it's something that anybody can do with their home computer. When you're out shooting, you can already be comfortable knowing what can you really protect for and what can you be okay with letting go.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just being in the field and knowing that I'm dealing with a high contrast, bright scene, and just knowing that I have the flexibility of not only having that wider color space with like a cinema gamut, but also employing that with a Canon Log 2 that gives me a wide dynamic range to work with. That I know that I have flexibility to correct either any exposure mistakes I have, work within this wider exposure range that I'm dealing with, and just know that I'm able to have the pleasing image that I have in my head that I'm experiencing and have that follow all the way through.
And you'll know that shooting in Log 2, that when you come back for the DI process, that you're going to get what you were thinking about while you were shooting, on set.
So we had the opportunity on set to use Canon's DPV 2410 reference monitor here, which was really nice to be able to look at the 4K image on set, but it also has a lot of other features. And I know that you guys have been able to play with it a little bit here. So can you give me an idea of some of the advantages of this monitor?
Sure. I think it's a great on-set reference monitor. It has a lot of different viewing options. You have Rec 709, you have BT 2020, you have high dynamic range, and for the ever-increasing list of deliverables that filmmakers are now required to provide to distributors, it's great to see what you're shooting in those different options and modes. And I know you can load LUTs onto it. Ben, I know that relates back earlier to what you were saying about a LUT being able to get you to places instantly.
Yeah, what's nice about that is being able to load the LUTs. If you have the ability with one monitor to reference different color spaces, you can then be able to reference these different deliverables without having to actually load up and have 5 monitors next to each other. And being able to load the LUT really allows you to do that. With one monitor, you can get 3 or 4 deliverables, get a preview of what that looks like.
And you can customize LUTs at a place, at a post facility, and then load them into your monitor and have that as well if you have a stylistic look you're trying to go for before you start shooting.
Great. So what I'd love to do right now is I'd love to now start diving into some of the footage that we shot, take a look at that, and start playing around with that. So Ben, thank you very much for joining us. This has been a really great conversation. And yeah, Jack, I'd love to dive right in.
Great, let's do it.